I can read. Moses then convoked the Israelite community and said to them, "These are the things that the Lord has commanded you to do. 6 days work may be done, but on the seventh day you should have a Sabbath of complete rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on it shall be put to death. You shall kindle no fire throughout your settlements on the Sabbath day." Moses said further to the whole community of Israelites, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Take from among you gifts to the Lord. Everyone whose heart so moves him shall bring them gifts for the Lord: gold, silver, and copper, blue, purple, and crimson wines, fine linen, and gold silk, tanned ram skins, dolphin skins, and acacia wood, oil for lighting, spices for the anointing oil, and for the aromatic incense, lapis lazuli, and other stones for settings for the ephod and breastplate. And let all among you who are skilled come and make all that the Lord has commanded: the tabernacle, its tent and its covering, its clasp and its planks, its bars, its posts, and its sockets, the ark and its poles, the cover and the curtain for the
We're going to
screen,
stop you there, and it goes on, tables and lamps and
lions.
yeah, everything. Okay, thank you for reading that. So the opening of our parsha has 4 themes that we've already seen. Can someone tell me the 4 themes that Bill read for us? Shabbat. All right, that's theme 2. Okay. Community, that's theme 1. What's theme 3? Bringing gifts. Good. What's theme 4? Making things. Great. So our portion, Vayakel, has 4 main themes: gathering community, bringing community together. Shabbos, right? 3 is generosity and giving, and 4 is work. So I want to take from there, if that's okay, and segue into a little piece of a commentary from Rabbi Shai Held from his book, The Heart of Torah, on this parsha, and then do some direct studying. So the subtitle of the parsha is The Exodus Toward Dignified Work. At the beginning of Exodus, God's people are enslaved to a false god, but by the book's end, they have been liberated to serve the real one. Exodus begins with the Israelites forced to build cities for a human king who views them as a potential threat to his rule and treats them accordingly. It ends with the people engaged in building a tabernacle, a sanctuary, in which the God who has redeemed them can dwell. This trajectory is crucial to Jewish theology. In Bible scholar Ellen Davis's words, the people move from perverted work designed by Pharaoh to destroy God's people to divinely mandated work designed to bring together God and God's people in the closest proximity possible in their life. As slaves in Egypt, the Israelites worked without respite against their will. But when they built the Mishkan, the tabernacle in this week's portion, in stark contrast, Moses asks first for voluntary contributions. Take from you among gifts, everyone whose heart shall be moved. Finally, freed from slavery, the Israelites are slowly being taught that there is a form of service radically different from slavery, one that honors and nurtures one's sense of agency rather than degrading it and whittling it away. Not surprisingly, as Moses lays out instructions for how to build the tabernacle, he starts by invoking Shabbat. On 6 days, work may be done, but on the 7th day, you shall have a complete rest, holy to God. An unbridgeable chasm divides enslavement to a human tyrant and service to a God of creation and covenant. Whereas the tyrant prohibits even a moment of Shabbos, God actually mandates it and regularizes it. Whereas serving Pharaoh had stripped the Israelites of their dignity, serving God will now affirm their dignity. Moreover, and critically, God commands them to take their own dignity seriously. Okay, I have one last thing from Shai, but any thoughts, comments, reactions? This is what we're gonna talk about work actually the rest of the time here together, but any comments or thoughts? Yeah, Ivan, welcome home.
You have to remember to keep this in the context too of golden calf,
Okay.
because they gathered a hakel
Mm-hmm.
around Aaron to build the calf.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and here, this is kind of like a tikkun to make up for that. But it's gathering the people in a positive way rather than in a negative way.
Right. Yeah, many rabbis actually write that even though it seems like the people are forbidden in last week's portion, Kitisa, with the writing of the second set of tablets, many rabbis actually say that this is actually the where they get complete forgiveness, whether it's with the building of the tabernacle or just this dignified work and like a proper way to gather and work. Yeah, Nelson online.
Two things. One, from the comments, the English that was used, he said that Pharaoh denied the slaves even a moment of Shabbos.
Yes.
Shabbos mean the Sabbath, or does it mean rest? That's the first question. The second question, I think it's an obvious question. Where did all this stuff come from? These are slaves.
Oh, you mean the materials?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, the traditional understanding is, right, during the plague of darkness, right, they went and took their 400 years worth of pay, right, from the Egyptians. They sort of took stuff from them. So, yeah, to answer your first question, I think it's a both question because Pharaoh regulated their lives, did now not allow them to rest one moment. And there wasn't any cycle of like every day was exactly the same, whereas we have Shabbat, which sort of resets our things. So the answer is sort of a both.
But back to the second question for a moment. I don't know if you remember last week, there was a plane crash where the passengers went back and took their luggage, and in doing that endangered people who hadn't left the plane yet. And so in the cover of darkness, they went and raided houses and they carried all this stuff like oh my God, I'm carrying a big color TV to Egypt, to the desert. You know, that's seems a little burdensome.
It was burdensome, that's why they gave it up.
Yeah, I'm just telling you what the traditional understanding is, right? Now, here's another option, which is perhaps the Egyptians saw what was going to happen to them, and they thought that by giving their Jewish neighbors who they persecuted, right, giving them reparations, that maybe their punishment, whatever, what was coming to them would be lessened, right? You can think about that in other cultures and in other societies where, right, an oppressed people is then given something as sort of like a guilt payment or something, right? With an idea that, okay, we can live happily ever after and you won't come and like attack us and kill us in response. But I want to get, if it's okay, I want to move us to what I want to cover. Okay, let me just add one more piece from Shai Held and then we'll get deeper into this idea of work. Herein lies a key difference between service of God and enslavement to a human pretender. Whereas the latter systematically dehumanizes his subjects, the former values and treasures them. Work and service come in dignified and also degrading versions. The Torah is about a journey from the latter to the former. The Torah captures the transition undergoing linguistically a process as well. In Egypt, their work was called avodah, from the Hebrew word eved, which means slave. In building the Mishkan, in contrast, the word predominantly used for work is melacha, from the root of messenger or even angel. The word malacha conveys immense dignity, since it is the same term used to depict God's work in creation in Genesis. The Israelites, in building the tabernacle, are in some sense mirroring God's work in creating the world. So far from degrading slave work, Melacha is godly work. So that's what we're going to now go into is, what's the idea of work?
But
Yeah.
But-
Oh,
but
okay, but,
when-
yeah.
when Moshe was trying to get the Israelites out of Egypt, it was to do avodah in the desert to their God.
Yeah, but that's what he told Pharaoh, because that was the only language Pharaoh understood. And I could give you that as an answer. Right?
Fine.
Right, this isn't, I mean, but I think you could say that the second is true, the dehumanization and everything else, right? This is just a linguistic thing. Obviously, avodah has a lot of meanings for us, and that's also the cultic worship of the high priest in the temple. So now we're gonna shift, if that's okay.
It also changes with the years.
With the years, yeah. Okay, I have a lot more that are not stapled. I'm sorry, I ran out of staples, so I'm you stay, well, like,
Paper clips.
yeah. So, I'm gonna start here. Take two pages. And then it's okay. It's 2 pages. Sorry, to look online, but it was against Shabbos, so. Here, there's a 1, there's a page, a 1, a 2, and a 3, and a 4. I do have 2 stapled here if people. Sorry, online, you're just gonna have to listen. It was up against Shabbos, so. Wait, I didn't start yet. Okay. So if you are home and you have the access to Pirkei Avot, we're going to be studying some Pirkei Avot. It's long to hand out 2 pieces of paper. Okay. Yeah, it's Avodah. Avodah. Okay, yeah, so you should have a page, a 1, a 2, a 3, and a 4. Okay, we ready? Okay, someone want to read to me? Well, let's just give 2 seconds. Pirkei Avot, if you're not familiar with it, we study it a lot. These are sort of ethical sayings of the rabbis, pithy, short sayings, aphorisms, if you want to say. This is from about 2,000 years ago, equivalent to the Mishnah. It's included within the Mishnah. So these are the first rabbinic writings. Mostly the rabbinic writings are law, but this is a short section of ethics, how to live your life. And it's part of the Talmud. That's Pirkei Avot. Pirkei Avot opens, we're in the first chapter. This is the opening chapter, and they open with a series of 2 rabbis in pairs. For example, Hillel and Shammai, that every generation had 2 rabbis, which were the head of their generation, the 2 leading rabbis. There's a question of whether like one served one purpose and one served the other. That's not important for us here, but we are now in the 4th generations of rabbis, so we're pretty early. This is around the year 0, the 2 rabbis that we're going to look at, and they have some interesting historical relevance, which we'll talk about after we study them, but their names are, you probably never heard of them, Shemaiah and Avtalion. You may have heard of them. Okay, someone want to read Pirkei Avot 110 in English?
Stay located.
Israel, this is Israel. Where, yeah, Mishnaic times is Israel.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is modern Hebrew as opposed to Aramaic, which we get later. Or not modern, this is Hebrew. Yeah, it shifts from Hebrew to Aramaic later. So now we're still talking Hebrew. So do someone want to read? Thank you very nice and loud.
Shemaiah and Avtalion received the oral tradition from them.
Meaning from the 2 previous rabbis that headed the previous generation.
Shemaiah used to say, love work, hate acting the superior, and do not attempt to draw near to the ruling authority.
Very often in these opening generations of rabbis, they would teach 3 things. Like their thing was, these are the 3 core principles that I live by. By the way, so we have Shemaiahs here. I'll just tell you, I'll give you Avtalion next, because one teaches after the other, right? So we had love work, hate acting the superior authority. We'll talk about what this last means, and don't get close to the government. That's basically, keep far away from the government. That's basically his 3 rules. I'll give you avtaliones, which are, be careful with your words, lest you will become exiled. Yeah, well, this is long. And disciples who come after you can drink your words, and if you lead them astray, they will die. And always try to honor the name of heaven. This one, I like this one better. Love work, hate superiors, or hate being superior. Do not attempt to draw near to the ruling authority. Any opening thoughts to these 3 guiding principles of this guy Shemaiah before we delve into learning who they are and what it means? Very timely. Yeah, go ahead.
The same scheme, but also, was it under the ruling of some foreign superior?
We'll talk about that. Yeah, we'll talk about, right, who are they saying is a superior? Okay.
The secular government.
Yeah, we'll talk about sort of what the government is and the government is at that moment. Okay, good. Keep going. Yeah, other thoughts?
Yes, I understand that he of the common people, they might not have a lineage of rabbinic ancestors and the like, and it's more reflective of the common people and the other. Sort of seemed like that was someone who had both respect for and maybe a sense of entitlement to the responsibility of.
Great, good, great. So we'll talk about them in a minute. Just want to sort of love work. That's sort of pretty obvious. By the way, there it's ahov et malacha. Right here's that same word malacha, which Rabbi Shai Held points out that was actually the word that they used for constructing the Mishkan. Let me just finish. Usna et harabanut. Hate the authority. By the way, today Rabbanut is the Orthodox rabbis in Israel, but obviously we're not talking about modern day things. So I'm going to give you 6 translations for this. Hate domination, hate acting superior to another person, hate mastery, hate the abuse of power, hate status, hate positions of power, hate authority. So it's unclear what that exactly means, but you get the gist from these different translations, sort of what's trying to be said here.
But the contrast there to love work.
Yeah, oh, yeah, definitely.
is
contrast.
That's
Yeah.
the contrast, love work means work gives you dignity, gives you self-satisfaction.
Yes,
Builds character,
yes,
creativity, all of the things that went into building the Mishkan, right?
mhm,
To building the tabernacle.
Yep.
I mean, as opposed to depending on miracles.
that's why we're learning. Yes, this is right. This is our connection to the Parsha, right? Right, the character building value of work and what the rabbis thought about work. And even perhaps for those retired sitting at this table, many of you probably still work, right? Like maybe you get a different type of payment, right? And other things, right? So that's another question that we could ask here is after you're retired from your primary employments, are you still working and what does that mean? Okay, just to give you a couple of opening commentaries, and then we're going to open up, and then we'll talk about who's Shemaiah and Avtalion. But I want to zoom in on the love work piece. Okay, someone want to read? Do you want to read Bartanora for me? So Bartanora. So this is a classic commentator on Pirkei Avot, not just the wine distributor. Yeah.
Love work. Even if he has from what to sustain himself, he is obligated to work as idleness leads to distraction.
Right, so even if you're wealthy, if you have parnasa, that's what it says here, if you read the commentary in the Hebrew, if you got enough parnasa, if you can sustain yourself without working, work. Why? Because otherwise, if you sit on your tuchus,
Yeah.
right? You're gonna get distracted, and then we'll see later, the rabbis say distraction is like a kind word for what actually can happen if you don't work. Right? You can think about it, right? Someone want to read Midrash Shmuel? I will apologize. This is Google Translate. There's not an English version of Midrash Shmuel, so I didn't have time. I just threw it into Google Translate, so not the greatest translation. Yeah. Someone want to read? Yeah, go ahead.
The intention of this is to say that one should not love the reward of the work that is taken upon him to do it and hate the work itself, but rather he should be happy with the work itself and enjoy and rejoice when doing it. He should enjoy and rejoice in what was allotted to him from heaven by being a craftsman. Rabbi Yonah, if you train yourself to be sedentary and idle, and you want to do work to support yourself, you will not be able to do it. You will already be accustomed to being sedentary and idle.
We'll stop there, right? Like it's hard to get back in the habit of working when you don't work for a while, right? It's like a
muscle.
Yeah, right. It's like a muscle. Yeah.
Something that people enjoy the work. There's a lot of work that somebody has to do.
Yeah.
And they don't enjoy it.
Right. That's not what they're saying. They're saying, even if you don't enjoy it, you should strive to enjoy them. It's not about just getting paid and not just working for the man. Yeah.
It makes me think of what the Germans, the Nazis did when the Jews came to the land. Work will set you free. How they deceived them and manipulated them into thinking they were gonna do something.
And in general, even taken away from that, it's just like, what is our approach to work? It's not just that the ends justify the means. It's not just like, I need to support my family, then I have to work and I'm right, like, and hate the work. Right? You have to get some joy out of work, even if it's menial, even if it's not exciting work or happy work, right? You got to feel good about what you're doing. That's what they're saying. Someone want to read? This is, I forget where I got this comment. This is another commentary that I forgot where I took it. Yeah, in many places. Want to read it again, Nina?
Sure. In many places, we see that the rabbis considered work to be important to proper moral behavior.
Right, which is what Ivan said earlier. Keep going.
This is learned from Exodus 29. 6 days shall you work, and on the seventh day you shall rest. Just as on the seventh day, it is a commandment not to work. So too, on the first 6 days, it's a commandment to work.
Right, that's different, right? That's an interesting reading of this, right? We always read the law of Shabbat that is in our Parsha, those who came late, that's the opening of Parsha Vayakhel. And this is a quote specifically from the 10 Commandments from Parsha Yitro, right? We focus on the commandment of Shabbos is to rest on Shabbat. But that commandment also says work the other 6 days, right? So this commentary, of course, I forgot to put who it is, right? Says there's 2 mitzvahs here. The mitzvah is to rest on Saturday, but also to work on Tuesday. Keep going. Even.
Oh, even the wealthy should work, for idleness may lead a person into depression and perhaps even into licentiousness.
Right? Before we turn the page, what do you think about this idea? I'm sorry, online. I hope you can hear it, but you can't see it. What do you think about that idea? Like, do you really think there is a mitzvah, a requirement to work?
Yeah.
What do
You
you
gotta
think?
work on Sunday?
I'm sorry?
You gotta work on Sunday? You can't have a 2-day weekend?
This, I think in ancient times, like up until 100 years ago or, right? I think that everybody worked 6 days or more, right? Right? You didn't like have a 2-day weekend, right? Or now people work like 4 days and have a 3-day thing, right? That's the work-life balance that I think that our next generation is striving for. They're
But
positive, negative.
I think also the fundamentalist Christians took Wednesday afternoon off.
I'll like the doctors, yeah. Okay, yeah, so I was John. Sorry. By the way, if you don't know, my father is caller user one, who's a physician who worked his whole life. So yes, I know. He also did not take a day off, but being facetious here, right? But like, what do you think about this idea? Yeah, what do you think, Charlie?
I remember there was a study done where they found that people who've worked all their lives and then they suddenly retire, they don't last.
Yeah. Oh, don't, my dad just retired. Don't say that too loud.
Maybe certain types of work create that kind of situation.
But I said like, I'm gonna use work in air quotes because, right, like, what does it mean? It means I didn't bring this in, but if you know, Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik was one of the leading Orthodox rabbis and really an amazing thinker. And he has two main writings that are sort of mainstream. One is Halachic Man, and the other one is called Lonely Man of Faith. Yeah. Lonely Man of Faith is really classic and really moving and beautiful. And one day we should probably read it as a congregation. And there he identifies, which we've talked many times, the beginning of Genesis and Bereshit. They're the two creation stories. There's Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. Right? Genesis 1, the last thing created after all, the sun and the trees and the water and animals, the ultimate creation is humanity. Right? So he understands a certain idea that there's this progression and that man is sort of superior, and also just like God, how does man sort of, with the best example of man, and he calls it Adam Rishon, that there are actually two different forms of human beings created. This is who is creative and masters the world, sort of takes the world and does something with it to make it even better. Yeah.
And in that context, man's created on the sixth day. So
Yes.
Shabbat's the first day.
Yes.
The seventh day.
Yes.
Or,
Yeah.
And that's why, going back to the Parsha,
Yeah.
you have here, Shabbat comes first before
working.
they begin
Before the
building,
work
whereas
begins.
before
The malacha.
when the instructions were being given back in chapter 25, it's at the end.
Yes.
It's just
Great.
juxtaposed.
Great. Yeah. Just to sort of flesh this out more, I'm giving you like the really basic version. Adam Sheni, the second man. Right? So there's man one and then there's man, or you can say human is not a man, right? Human one, human two, even though Soloveitchik just says man. Human two, actually, humanity is man is created before the animals, right? If you know, right, man is lonely. Humanity is lonely, and then God creates all these sort of animals to say, all right, do you feel less lonely now? Right? And then finally, Ezer Kenegdo makes a helpmate, Eve, right? So that's a story, but there Soloveitchik learns that human is actually placed in the garden and given a job to serve and tend the garden.
That's what I was gonna
Yeah.
say, that there's a
And then-
responsibility.
And then we're gonna actually read here, because there's another thing, actually, there's an interesting thing. Only then are people allowed to eat from the garden. So you actually have to work. You actually, like, God, we have this idea that God fed us and God clothed us, right? That we didn't actually have to do anything initially, that God sort of took care of us. But if you read the Torah closely, and that's one of these commentaries later on this piece of paper I handed you, it actually says, no. We didn't eat until we worked the land. It wasn't that we were planted in this garden and it was already overflowing with tomatoes and grapes and all this other things. It actually, God placed us in this garden and said, work. And then you can eat.
Responsibility.
Yeah, this is that dignity, responsibility, right? Sort of, you got to do something in order to sustain yourself. Yeah.
I would think that since every human being has certain talents and perceptions and abilities, that there would be an obligation
Yeah, or if you want to sit on the inside, you can. Keep going.
I would think that since every human being has certain perceptions, talents, and abilities, the obligation to work would be to contribute to the collective, toward humanity as well. It would go beyond self-gratification.
Beautiful. Yeah, great. Great. Let's just do a couple more commentaries that I didn't tell you about them yet, but if you flip the page of what we have. Anyone know? Well, I don't know what to say. Avot Rabbi Natan. So there's like another version of Pirkei Avot, that is lesser known. Avot Rabbi Natan is another collection of writings from the rabbis around the time of the Mishnah, which is actually an expansion of Pirkei Avot. Just like the Talmud or the Gemara is an expansion of the Mishnah, Avot Rabbi Natan is an expansion of Pirkei Avot. It's called the sort of the ethics or the teachings of Rabbi Natan. It actually wasn't probably written by Rabbi Natan, but he's one of the main contributors. So he's mentioned a lot, so they called it his. Okay. Someone want to read just the commentary? How so? And this is after they taught the thing. Love, work, hate, power. Stay away from authority.
How so? This teaches us that a person should love work and not hate work. For just as the Torah was given in a covenant, so work was given in a covenant. As it says, for 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, and on the seventh day is the Sabbath of the eternal your God. Rabbi Akiva would say, sometimes a person labors and escapes death, and sometimes a person does not labor and becomes liable for death from heaven. How so? Say a person sat around all week and did no labor. And
Do you
then-
know anybody like that? Yeah, keep going.
Boom. And then on the eve of the Shabbat, he had nothing to eat, but he had money that had been designated in his house. So he
Yeah,
took
to the temple. Let me just pause you to explain this, right? In the times of the temple, you did tithes, right? You set aside a certain portion of your income, of the crops that you got, if you sold your livestock, just like the IRS, you had to pay taxes. You had to pay 10%, or there were different percentages, right? And you actually, over the course of the year, when you did it, you literally put that money aside. Sort of like, like I have withholdings that are from my salary so that I, prepare, right? But those money put aside, you designated for the temple now, like I can't touch this. Like this is God's money, right? I can't actually, like if I need a couple bucks, I can't take it. It's called hekdesh is the formal thing, right? This is holy, dedicated to God. So now they're telling the story, right? Like I didn't go to work this week. I don't have any money, but I have that $100 set aside that I dedicated to God. Yeah, all right, keep going now. Keep going, Russ.
Okay, however.
Now, so he took.
Oh, where am I at? Okay, so he took from this and ate, and thus became liable to death from heaven.
Right, because the punishment
Death.
for using sacred money is you would get killed. All right, keep going.
However, if he had labored on the building of the temple, then even though they paid him in money designated for the temple, and he took that money and used it for food, he would still escape the death penalty.
Right, this is different hekdesh, right? That money, someone else contributed to make the temple, right? We actually, even just like the donated items that we talked before, like some people, I guess, actually got paid. This is probably later in actually the building of the temple, not the tabernacle in the desert, but sort of like the rabbi, right? Like you donate money to the synagogue, right? And that is how I am paid, right? Like it is holy money for you. You're dedicating to the shul, right? I'm allowed to take that money because I'm getting remunerated for my work. Okay, keep going.
Rabbi Doste would say, how do we know that if someone did no work all 6 days, he would end up doing work on the seventh? For see, if he sat all of the days of the week and did no work, and then on the eve of Shabbat, he had nothing to eat, he would go out looking and end up seized by conscription officers who would grab him by the collar and force him to do on the Shabbat all the work that he had not done for 6 days.
Funny, like they're got, right, they're grabbing people to do work, I don't, whatever, right? So like, don't walk around Friday night looking for work because it's gonna end up badly. Keep going.
Okay. Even added.
Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Okay.
Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar would say, even Adam did not taste anything until he worked, as it says. And God placed him in the garden to work it and guard it. And then from every tree of the garden, you may certainly eat.
Right, that's what I said before. All right, keep going. Then now this is like, having said all that, this is the most important line, I think, of this commentary. Go ahead.
Okay. Rabbi
The
Tarfon.
famous Rabbi Tarfon that you read about in the Haggadah, the Seder in a couple of weeks. Keep going.
Rabbi Tarfon would say, even the Holy Blessed One did not rest his presence upon Israel until they had done work. As it says, make me a sanctuary and I will dwell among them.
Okay, pause here for a second. So how do we learn about the importance of work? The opening of the entire section about the construction of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, which we read in Parshat Truma 3 or 4 portions ago, there's this very famous line, Asuli mikdash v'shachanti betocham. Make for me a sanctuary and I shall dwell among them, or dwell among you, right? So look at the construction of that sentence. It's not, I will dwell with you when you make me a home. It's build me a home, work on making a physical home for me, and then I will dwell with you, right? So God is even teaching us the importance of work.
So God made the universe, built a home for us. Now we build a home.
Yes, exactly, beautiful. And that's this whole going back to the Genesis. All right, now he tells you what you're supposed to do. Keep going.
Rabbi Yehuda ben Betira would say, if someone who has no work to do, what should he do? If he has a dilapidated yard or field, he should go and work on them. As it says, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. What do we learn from the phrase, do all your work? That even someone who has dilapidated yards or fields should work on them. Rabbi Yosef HaGalili would say a person dies only because of idleness.
We'll stop you there, right? So again, there's a pretty, if you look in the Hebrew, this is from the 10 Commandments on Shabbat, V'asita kol melachtecha. You should do all of your work, meaning, right, even if you don't have a job or whatever, right, there is always work to do, right? And and that's a positive thing to work. Again, I'm gonna put in quotations because there are many understandings of work here, right? And if you don't work, what's gonna happen to you? Right, that was, I think, what Jackie said, you're gonna die. You're gonna die. All right, what do you think? So number one, can you see the difference between Pirkei Avot, which is really short, and Avot the Rebbe Natan, which is really long? So then it's like every rabbi from that time period of the Mishnah who's written something similar to it, they collect it. Okay, comments, thoughts, and then I'll give you, I didn't tell you yet about these guys, Shmaya and Bob Pelion, and a little more commentary on it.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I would just say that maybe this boils down to not only the need for some purpose, but also the ability to exercise whatever work it takes to achieve that purpose, or at least try to achieve the purpose. Because I've noticed, with family members who are ill, or not even ill, just very old, they can't do any work, and sometimes they just
Whittle away. Yeah, exactly. Just for those that came in late, I'm gonna give you a little snippet. Rabbi Shai Held, writing on this portion, compares the work of Egypt when we were in Egypt and were slaves and it forced work to us, where there was no dignity. In fact, the Hebrew word there was avodah, right? Versus all the construction that God gave us, a positive construction project to work on. And there, interestingly, the word that's used is melacha. So it's both the work itself and sort of the rulings of the work, and that we didn't have any time period to rest and have our own time versus that. All right, so.
Would I be off
Yep.
base if I said that the work wasn't necessarily always physical work, but it could be spiritual work or working on your musar or whatever?
It could be, although here, now I'm gonna get to my favorite Mishnah Pirkei Avot commentary right now, which is the one from the Rabbinical Assembly, which is from Rabbi Gordon Tucker in New York and Rabbi Tamar Elad Applebaum in Jerusalem. And actually, I will give you the answer that Rabbi Tucker says for that. So you just said it.
I was planted, as to say.
Okay, yes, let me just find it. Okay.
Did it again.
Anyone who comes to the conclusion that one should involve oneself in Torah study without doing work, and thus derives one livelihood from charity, obviously, I don't think you're talking about that necessarily, dishonors the Torah, extinguishes the light of faith, brings evil upon himself, forfeits the life of the world to come. Our sages commanded and declared, love work and hate domination. Ultimately, such a person will steal from others. Our greatest sages were wood choppers. They were porters. They were water drawers. They did not ask anything from the public. They refused to accept anything that was given to them. That's a little bit different than what you're saying, but they're saying that actual work and not just personal edification, let's say. Obviously, it's important to work on ourselves and to grow and to study and to learn, right? But at some point, it's also good to be creative. And this is that Adam Rishon and Adam Sheni, right? The different type of human beings that God actually created us to create and to produce something, right? So again, maybe that's volunteering and, like you can go into what those things, it doesn't, not everything is about, right? Yeah.
To me, it speaks to context of all the other mitzvahs and everything else. Community. And also,
Very nice.
yeah, but the thing is individual.
Yes, very nice.
You keep busy, but if you're going after somebody else or something else, then you're not productive. People will have a certain image of you.
Very nice.
Because to me, the mitzvahs, especially at this time, were not just about the people, because it was trying to build a community.
I'd say even now.
Never had.
Even now, and think about remote work, like this is a whole, we could have a whole question about remote work and other things. I do want to tell you about Shmaya and Avtalion, if that's okay. So there's like a lot of writing. I'm going to give you Rabbi Tamar's version of them. Tradition records that these two rabbis, this pair, Shmaya and Avtalion, were converts to Judaism. Bill was actually alluding to that. Who became the leaders towards the end of the era of Zugot, of pairs, a period in which the Hasmonean civil wars reached their peak. The Hasmoneans were the Maccabees, right? So in the end of the Hanukkah story, the Hasmoneans, which were Mattathias's family line, they were the leaders of the rebellion. They pushed out the Greeks or Syrians or whatever you want to call them, right? The Seleucids, whatever, and they, right, re-purified and rededicated the temple, and they became the leaders of the Jewish people, and Herod even, is from that line. So at this point in Jewish history, around the year 0, the Hasmoneans were involved in a civil war, and also if you have studied Jewish history in this time period, end of the Second Temple, this is when there were the Sadducees and the Pharisees and the Dead Sea sect and the Essenes, if you think they're different, right? There was real, what we call sectarian Judaism, that Jews did not get along. Many of them were wealthy and sort of separated themselves from others and thought they were the authority and better. Many of them worked deals with this, the Romans were already sort of some governing power also during this time. So it's unclear who the authority is. Are they talking about the Romans here? The rabbis, are they talking about these sort of wealthy, unapproachable leaders that are heavily taxing or like not taking care of the majority of the population? politicians who are not really, have focus on their own personal gains. And so that's sort of the history at this moment. Right? Okay. The two of these rabbis take a close look at reality and ask what kind of sovereignty and freedom the Torah seeks for those who study its ways. The Talmud identifies them as descendants of Sennacherib. Anyone know who Sennacherib was?
Yeah, the Assyrian.
The Assyrian king who attacked Judah in the time of King Hezekiah in the 600s. And it's interesting to see that these two rabbis, by the way, they're not called rabbis, they're sages. This is before people were called rabbis, right? Later on, there are a lot of people rabbis, right? They're just known by their name. And it's not just because we like them and we feel close to them, like Hillel and Shammai, who are the next pair after them, right? It's not Rabbi Hillel and Rabbi Shammai. So the term rabbi, the connotation, the title didn't really exist yet. Okay, so these two sages who became the spiritual leaders of the Jewish people of their own day were particularly concerned with issues of freedom and sovereignty. The rabbis portrayed Shmai and Avtalion as leaders who did not cower before the Roman government who ruled Israel in their time, but who related to its representatives with stable, unruffled inner freedom. We can infer this from the story from the Talmud. It once happened that the high priest came out of the temple and all the people were following the high priest after he did some grand service that everybody sort of was focused on, right? I think about a sports game and LeBron leaves the stadium and everybody's following him, right? Everybody wants a moment, a picture, right? Get close to this grand, this amazing, celebrity, right? Okay. And then Shmaya and Avtalion were walking on the other side of the pavilion or something. And what happened? All the people ran to see them from the high priest. They forsook the high priest and instead followed Shmaya and Avtalion. Eventually, Shmaya and Avtalion came to the temple, right? Or visited the temple, taking their leave of the high priest. They said to him, they talked to the high priest for a second and then they left. And as they were leaving, the high priest turns to them and he called them descendants of heathens. That's what he called them. He said, goodbye, descendants of heathens. By the way, are you ever supposed to say that to a convert? You might know the rabbis say it's actually a sin, a transgression to mention to a convert that they converted, to call them, right? Because it was considered like a shiksa, calling someone a shiksa. It was a negative thing, right? You shouldn't disparage people, the more so they made a commitment, right? Most of us were born into it, right? But they actually underwent a whole process of transforming their lives, right? We should uphold them, and calling them a goy or a convert or descendants of goyim, right, is really bad. But the high priest, who's considered the moral and spiritual leader of the Jewish people, basically slapped them in the face. So they answered him. This is a story in the Talmud. They said, the descendants of heathens who do the work of Aaron, the original high priest, arrived here in peace. But may the descendant of Aaron who doesn't do the work of Aaron not come in peace. Right? So they said, you are the actual descendant of Aaron, and you're not fulfilling the values that Aaron, the high priest, upheld. But we, who are descendants of converts, or are converts, descendants of Sennacherib, this awful general that attacked the Jewish people, we're actually doing God's work. We're doing God's work. Shmai and Avtalion did not cower before the high priest's leadership. He greeted them rudely, referencing to the fact of their non-Jewish lineage, which Jewish law forbids. Clearly, he was miffed that the people had treated Shmai and Avtalion with deference that he believed he should have enjoyed. But their reply was none too subtle reminder that the high priest was in dereliction of his own duties to act toward all the people with love and kindness. The work of Aaron refers to the letter's reputation as a peacemaker. In the view of Shemaiah of Avtalion, then it is not a person's status that determines one's worthiness, but one's inner stance reflecting one's core values. Indeed, this outlook grants them total freedom and constitutes a model of leadership not subjugated to an external hierarchy imposed upon it from within. Each of the sages warned against subjugation of a different kind. This gets into their teachings. So why does Shemaiah say to love work? He adjures us to identify and reject the all too human propensity to attempt to defy those in power by taking refuge in some special status, being arrogant, rooted in an unearned sense of entitlement, destroys the power of Torah and corrupts us. So that's Rabbi Tamar's take on this, on who they are and why he taught love work, hate superiority, authority, whatever you want to say, and distance yourself from the government. Comments, thoughts? Yeah, Alina?
Question.
Yes.
How can the rabbis nowadays in Israel, against everything that is written, say, declare that it's okay to study and not do any work and get the people who are working and getting killed?
Yep, I don't have a great answer. How about this? I'm not going to answer you. Another Rabbi Tamar. Separate yourself from the swamps of rabbinic and government politics, in both of which someone can drown. Shemaiah tells us, live the life of freedom that is yours to work. Loving work means loving the raw materials that are taken from the local environment among yourself. Free from the forest and trees, flax. Refuse to valorize one kind of labor, one another. The Torah tells us to interact with real life, and that is an ongoing feature of human existence. Be engaged in your work, cherish the scent of a plowed field and the basic freedom of any material that can be worked and reworked. That is how to construct the character of one who combines the idea of personal freedom with a commitment to the freedom inherent in allegiance to Torah. You know, the rabbis say that we are supposed to be partners with God.
Yeah.
That's one of our sort of core things we believe, and sort of the proof text of it is God creates wheat, right? God sort of made the earth to create wheat, but we take wheat, the human beings, and we make flour to make bread, right? God created grapes, right? And we make
Wine.
I was gonna say cut grape juice, but yeah. Right? Or matzah bread, if you put wine, grape juice in there, or just water, right? So, but it's this idea, right? God created a world which then we're supposed to work. Yeah, did you want to say something, Cheryl, or you're just?
Just reacting, maybe no one else heard it, but I heard in the last thing that you read from Rabbi Tamar, I believe.
Yeah.
A call to retract from government. So does that mean no activism?
Right, I mean, yeah, right, she's reading, I don't think activism existed in Shemaiah and Avtalion's time, like their resistance was basically saying, you know, F you to the high priest. Right, sorry for my assumed language, yeah, right, but that's basically what they're saying, like, you think you're such a leader, right? But actually, I could also say their activism is that they taught these values. They taught what the values are that you should live by. Right? So that was their activism, right? I think, you know, and we didn't look at a lot of commentary on that other thing, right? Stay away from government. There was also just a fear. And remember, this is talking about the Roman government. There was a fear, like, if you got involved in them, it would come back to you really bad. All right, any other closing thought? Like, again, I have like so many commentaries on this, but like I'll tell you, Rabbi Steinsaltz in his commentary on the Mishnah says, loving labor because it facilitates physical and mental health. Yeah, that's what Steinsaltz says. Me'am Loez says, don't rely on generational wealth, right? If you're wealthy and you don't have enough if you have plenty to sustain yourself, because the world is a wheel. Every point that goes up must come down, right? You might lose that wealth, right? You won't have a skill, you won't have an income coming in, right? And Rabbi Twersky, in his commentary in the Mishnah, says, no work should be beneath you. Yeah, so, yeah.
Right, and then going back to our parsha and the whole thing with this building of the tabernacle.
Yes.
Is that the Israelites complained all the time.
Yes.
Action, they were, protesting and so on, except when they were working, except when they
It's
were
true.
building the Mishkan.
It's true.
And
It's true.
that ties it all together.
It's true, right? So part of it, well, I'll close with like, it's really hard to understand why the Torah repeats the whole building process again. You probably know the Torah is very, it tells things in as little words as possible in general. There are no superfluous words. And if something is repeated or said in a really grand way, right, it either means it's emphasized and it's really important, or it means that we take another, it teaches us something else, right? And the first time it taught us X, and the second time it taught us Y. One example is there's that classic line, you shouldn't cook a mother in its, or shouldn't cook a kid in its mother's milk, right? And we say that it teaches us, right, not to eat cheeseburgers. You don't have meat and milk, but you might know that it's repeated 3 times in the Torah. So the rabbis actually understand that it teaches us 3 different principles. One is that you don't cook it. One is that you don't eat it, right? Like I could work at McDonald's and make a cheeseburger for somebody else, but I don't eat it, right? So the question is, am I violating? The mitzvah says don't cook. It doesn't say eat it, right? It says don't cook a kid in its mother's milk. So theoretically, ideally, I shouldn't really be making cheeseburgers for somebody else, right? So, and the third one is that you also shouldn't gain any benefit from it. I might not physically be cooking cheeseburgers, but I happened upon a cheeseburger, right? Or whatever else, I shouldn't then sell it and make any money from it, right?
Shouldn't be a McDonald's franchisee.
Right, like I shouldn't own a thing. I might not personally cook it, but I might own something. Yeah, I hope they don't serve cheeseburgers at East Coast Custard, but yeah, okay. We're in there for a second. So, yeah, sorry, now to finish my thought. So why is the whole construction project repeated? So, right, the whole first versions in Truma and Tetzaveh are to teach us the actual process. Like these are all the pieces to build it. So why does it come a second time? We have to like understand why. So maybe the understanding is the importance of work. Again, there's like the rabbis come up with a million reasons, but they gotta like figure out, here's the second reason. So this is the importance of working. Another one is like inspecting things. They're all different things. All right. Yeah. Last word. Yeah.
I just think the whole emphasis on work is multi-layered, and that God wants us to work, live a purposeful life that's full of ethical.
Yep.
Both.
Yep.
Also spiritual side. I mean, I think work can encompass every aspect of being human.
Beautiful. Right. And that's what Soloveitchik talks about in Lonely Man of Faith. And then actually you're not lonely when you do that.
In Kemet,
right? We can go through all these like lines about the importance of work. Again, this wasn't supposed to be some like socialist commentary or like, kibbutz life, or like our kids watch Thomas the Train, and like all Thomas the Train is all about, work, good thing about working. But this is really like, we don't always value work. And
Made in the image of God. God is creative.
Yeah.
And so we are.
Amen. So thank you. I'm done talking about work. We got to get to work at shul.